And hello and welcome to End to End, the podcast where we talk about all things pony and a few things not. I'm your host, Duhad. Joining me as always are the Lightning Rabbit
Hi.
and Firebolt,
I'm here.
though not Cabral, because despite pushing back the record day by a day to go deep sea fishing, he did not show up today.
Yeah. Not that he's bitter
I-
or anything.
Not that any of us are at all bitter about him going out on the glorious California coast and fishing for rockfish all day in the last gleaming days of fall before winter rolls in, while the rest of us freeze up north.
Yay, snow. Actually, it's not.
Anyway, today we have a very special guest with us, and as an interesting note, this is a very special guest that we've had tried a couple of times to have on the show. Unfortunately, recording Gremlins seem to have been playing a bit of hell with Lightning Rabbit's
I'm sorry.
equipment, and we lost the episode. So
Yeah.
once again, I'd like to to ask you all to help me welcome Ether Echoes to the show.
Hello, everyone.
It's a wonderful author over on FimFiction, the head of a story group, and the author of Through the Well of
Pirene.
See, I give him one, so call it Prim because of I don't remember what this
R
was.
was in the wrong place there.
Anyway, but yes, you wrote the Through the Well of Pirene, which is a very frequently featured story on Equestria Daily. Really interesting young adult novel story. And of course, you, as I mentioned before, you were also the head of a fairly substantial group on FimFiction. And one of the reasons I actually contacted you in the first place was actually because you're also one of the authors who have done this very interesting thing that happens a lot in fan fiction, where one author is not able to continue a story for whatever reason, and they actually will essentially, grandfather it off to another writer, which is something that I just find incredibly fascinating because you never see. I mean, you do, but very rarely see this sort of thing happen in the professional publishing scene. You get like authors who have died have close friends or family try and finish their unfinished trilogies or quadrilogies or 20 book epics. But you don't really see, authors very frequently go, this is a really cool story idea. I really like it, but for whatever reason, I can't really finish it. Hey, you, would you like to pick this up and run with it?
Yeah, it's something I can't imagine you would ever see that in literary circles. I mean, maybe someone who has like a degree in the history of literature could prove me wrong, but I mean, authors are getting paid for what they do for that, and they have a lot of discipline from years and years of writing usually. Whereas fan fiction authors tend to be new young writers, and they're not writing their own stuff, so they feel iffy about it. Yeah, in fact, that's the story we're talking about is Them. That is THEM, originally by Chaotic Dreams, I believe. Yeah, Chaotic Dreams. And he decided basically to give up pony fiction in general. And so he wanted to hand off various stories. And since I was involved with Them, pretty much from its conception, I jumped on his back and beat him until he gave it to up. No, okay. No, I tasked him basically to give it to me when he was done with it. So.
Yeah, so it's this interesting situation where you have this story that like someone will start it, and then just gets moved along. And as you said, yeah, that's not something that you see in the literary world. But because of the less I don't want to say less stringent, because there are plenty of people who are really putting a lot of effort into the work they do in fan fiction. But because of the less legal troubles of passing off a paid manuscript to someone else, I guess maybe part of it, nature of fan fiction, you do get this kind of weird informal culture that is actually really interesting. It's really kind of evolved over time. I'd imagine as, right off the bat, early fan fiction was pretty much just, was just fiction. You got these published serial stories of like sequels to the War of the Worlds and
Mhm.
sequels to the works of
Sure.
Sherlock Holmes. The Arthur Conan Doyle's has about 1 million uh, you know copycat writers who have written the continuing adventures of Sherlock Holmes, and H.P. Lovecraft is like infamous. Part of the reason why the Lovecraftian mythos is so popular is because you know a couple hundred authors after Lovecraft picked up his work and just started dabbling in it.
Mhm.
But with the internet, really taking off in a big way, you started getting communities of fan fiction writers, and this is all kind of turned into this whole thing, this really interesting thing. And from an outside perspective, it's really weird trying to figure out how it works.
Yeah, I can well imagine. Um, yeah, I have to say it's definitely an experience taking over someone else's work. Especially since you still got the old author hanging around helping you out, and you have to do with people. Do people want to see the new person's vision? Are they going to defect? Like I still don't have as many views or favorites as the original one,
Hmm.
and that's always like is it worth it to take over someone's work? I think in this case it is because I feel I have a personal connection to one in question. I mean, like, I'm thinking back to Lovecraft, for example. He encouraged this back during his lifetime when he would keep communication with August Derleth and what's his name, the guy who did Conan, which
Oh,
was
Arthur Conan Doyle. No, no, sorry. No, that wasn't Arthur Conan
Sorry?
Doyle. No, it
um,
was
Howard
Howard.
something Howard. His name is slipping me right now.
Yeah,
Howard
Yeah,
Stern.
yes,
sharing ideas back then was a much more common thing than it is today, I noticed. Most fantasy series seem to exist in isolation,
hmm.
whereas back then you'd see authors communicating with each other on these concepts all the time. And I think I'm not sure if that's like is that a legal thing? Is that just because publishing houses are more jealous than they used to be? I don't know, honestly.
I really couldn't say. I think some of it might just be sort of the way that stories are written these days. It used to be, it's gonna kill me that I don't remember the guy's name, but the guy who wrote, like the original Conan stories and the original Lovecraft stories, uh, they would often be, published in serials. You'd have them appearing in the same magazines. So I'm guessing the publishers of those magazines were probably a little bit more, willing and maybe even encouraging of their writers to cross promote, so that people would want to go into the magazine and go, oh, hey, my favorite author is in writing, this month, but this other guy who is, doing sort of a crossover thing with him, he's doing that. I'm gonna check that out. It's
That's
a little
true.
sort of a comic book sort of thing going on.
Isn't that kind of the point of collaborative fan fiction endeavors like the Luniverse or other things like or Winningverse, other things like that?
I can only imagine. I honestly, I don't think I've really read into any collaborative fan fiction projects. Though, Fireball, I don't know if you happen to know any. You tend to, I think you've read a bit more fan fiction than I have.
Yeah, I actually haven't. I don't know of any off the top of my head that were collaborative. There's several stories that I've seen that have like one person is the main author, and then it's you know I guess looked at by several other people. I guess the one thing I can think of is that a lot of times for past sins it'll be credited as Penstroke and Batty Gloom that wrote Past Sins. Um, so I mean, I guess you could have like a co-author on some things. I know I've written stuff as a collaborative effort long before ponies or anything like that, but it does happen though.
Interesting,
Hmm.
very
Hmm.
interesting. Moving on from your the work that you do with that you've done on them,
Hmm.
and the work that it involves working off of someone else's original source material.
Uh-huh.
What about your own source material? We've already mentioned Through the Well, which is a fantastic story, but you've written a fair few, little pieces, and you know, Well, you're probably one of the longest form writers we've actually had on the show to date, with the possible exception of Cloudy Skies. I don't actually know if Lost and Found or The Well is longer, but there's not a lot of people who really sit down to work out these incredibly long stories, like these really big, book style narratives
Mhm.
in fan fiction. You do have them. I mean, there's stories like Past Sins, Fallout Equestria, Project Horizons, etc., that are well beyond the length of many books in real life. But generally speaking, that's the rare exception.
Yeah, I'm probably slightly unusual in that I'm actually not a great fan of short fiction. I'm the kind of person who likes to see a lot of character development, a lot of setting development, and if it's too short, I often feel like I've been cheated to a
Mm,
certain degree. I like to see where things go, you know. In terms
definitely.
of influences with Pyrene, which is going to keep going and getting bigger, at least for a while, it does have a definite plan. I won't say that it has been planned down to every chapter, but I know where everything's going and I know where it's going to end. So, it's going to end, but it's going to be big. Like, I'd say like a trilogy of young adult novels. That's the length I am aiming for. Or maybe a duology. That's probably more apt. Yeah, in terms of influences all over the place. Yeah, as you pointed out, and I've said a couple of times, young adult novels like, Harry Potter or similar big fictions like that. Also more adult fiction like Wheel of Time, um, at David Eddings series, The Bulgaria and The Malorian. Those are huge influences on me. Also, television like Babylon 5 or Buffy the Vampire Slayer, or movies, particularly Dark Crystal or Labyrinth, would be, the biggest influence, I would say. And it's really just like that's the kind of things I want to write. And this is me getting to do that in a situation where I have a guaranteed audience and can, see how people appreciate what I'm doing. And there's already been a few people who point out, like, you drop the ponies thing, and maybe this, maybe you could put this up on a shelf and publish it in a store somewhere. I Yeah, I don't know if you guys have had a chance to read it. I guess Duhad has had an opportunity so far.
I don't know if Firebolt or Lightning Rabbit have.
Mhm.
I think I might have read. I remember reading some of it definitely a while ago when we interviewed the first time before I lost the recordings and couldn't find them again. Um, but I haven't read any more of it since then, unfortunately.
Tisk
Well,
tisk.
sorry, so busy. Half of the time I was just trying to run the data recovery program to get the episode back. That's all I've been doing for the past few months.
Indeed. Firebolt, what about you? You had a chance to, at least skim Pyrene?
I was unable to look at it with my new job and trying to get you know
That's very,
Sweet and letting the darkness out.
that was very politically correct. I was unable at this time to read the fanfiction.
Oh,
Well,
Lord.
I guess do you how much have you read all of it so far? I don't know.
I don't think I've read all of it yet. I kind of keep on getting distracted by the pile of stories I'm all reading at once, including another full length book that I have to read that I'm reading for another interview. But I think I've read at least 15 chapters.
Oh, oh, there's 10 so far. So
Oh, then in that case, I'm screwing it up. I'm mixing it up with another
Well, I don't
story.
know what you've been reading.
Yeah, I was like, okay, no, that's okay. That would have been the supernatural romance story that I have to read. That's like the book from the other author. Okay, yeah, I probably have actually finished what you've written of Pyrene then, because
Oh, that was
oh,
priceless. I'm so glad we got that on tape. I
glad you.
think I've read all 15 chapters, but there's only 10. Oh,
yeah, it's like yeah, and I was
really?
like, okay, it's one book or the other. I've finished one. I've read 15 chapters of the other, and if your story hasn't got 15 chapters, then I think I have it worked out in my head now.
That's okay. Honestly, keeping track of the chapters can be a little tricky sometimes. That's why I name them rather than just number them.
Yeah,
But yeah,
also,
I've always curious to see how people take it because it is a very different sort of story from a lot of things out there. In fact, that's why I made it. In that there are a lot of human and equestrian stories. I've always been interested in that, but the thing is, I've never read a human and equestrian story that even if it started well, it didn't go well as it went on.
Yeah.
Like I guess he's like this is excluding like Pony on Earth, like anthropology, and even that I have some issues with, like where the last third of that, the Discord arc, kind of just falls apart. But
The story was kind of
sorry.
falling apart before that point. Just
Yep.
anyway, we're not talking about that though.
But yeah, I think there was potential in this genre, and that's why I wanted to write Pyrene. I wanted to write it from the perspective of a sincere attempt at a young adult novel featuring humans in the Ponyverse. And I'm always very curious to see how people feel about it and what they think, where they think it's going, how they interpret it, what they feel about it, all sorts of things. So give me your impressions so far.
It really depends on how you work it. There's some things that work for human in Equestria and some things that don't work for human in Equestria.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Without going into any details on it, because I don't want to go ahead and basically tell people go and check out the story. By the way, spoilers.
Yeah.
Here's everything that I would actually recommend writing about it, summed up for you in a few sentences. But no, I think you actually got a pretty good. One of the reasons I wanted to, I thought you were an interesting person to bring on the show is because you've got a better. I think you have a better grasp on the general idea of how someone would actually think in the situation. Because there's a problem that a lot of these type of stories have that it comes off as incredibly unrealistic that a person would end up in a place like this and just immediately, like, even if they were a fan of the show, just immediately go like, oh my god, I'm in a world without technology and I no longer have hands, and like
wish fulfillment. That is a horrible thing.
Yeah, it's like, okay, dude, I'd love, like, when I watched The Lord of the Rings, I would have loved to go to Hobbiton, but you know what? I wouldn't want to stay there.
Yeah.
It's cool, but I could, like, as idealistic as that place looked, I know that I'd be bored out of my mind after about a week.
It's like Australia. You want to go for the vacation, but there's not really much there afterwards.
Oh.
I'm just saying, like, as much as
By
I
the way,
wanted
hold-
to go to Australia, I had someone advise me against actually moving there.
Also, Lightning Rap, I've got a message from Writer's Block. He says you're fired.
He lives in America. He can't be patriotic anymore. Even he moved out of his own country.
Great. I'll have to show this to my Australian friends. I love that.
Oh God.
But yeah, no, if I had to say that, like, without going into heavy spoilers, how I'd recommend Pirene to people, and what I'd say you've done well with it is believable characters, and really kind of getting the idea of a human equestrian story that is not just my idealized adventures in this cartoon setting.
In which I marry Twilight Sparkle or something like that.
Yeah.
I heard of someone who turned in a paper like that, only it was a harem where he married all of the main six.
Wait, what?
Oh, because that's perfectly legal.
This was someone on Equestria Study, and she said she was grading papers, and someone handed in their harem fan fiction, where he was a brony who went to Equestria. So yeah, but yeah, that does not happen in Pirene. In fact,
Thank goodness.
God.
Thank God.
Yeah, if anything, though, I sometimes feel like I just finished writing chapter 11 about a week ago, and that's one where actually it's one of the few times where one of the main characters, Daphne, gets an opportunity to just take it easy and relax while she's waiting for something to happen, basically. And I really enjoyed writing that. And the thing is, but now I've got to get back to the plot. I can't hang around and have her experience things, and that can be a little frustrating when you love experience things. But that's the thing, is that you have to be realistic. People aren't just gonna laugh around all day,
Yeah, and I haven't obviously haven't had a chance to read that chapter yet. I imagine it would be pretty enjoyable, but the experience of reading what the hell is it? It was Memoirs of a Reality Jumper have taught me the valuable lesson that no matter how well you can write fluffy, slice of life stories that are taking place in between a main storyline.
Mm-hmm.
You can only do that for so long before, no matter how lovely your writing is, you just want to, your readers just want to throttle the author and, tell them to get on with it.
Yep. Yeah, that's that I was actually getting to the point where, yep, this is time to move on. Yeah, and I'm pushing it as it is, definitely. I do not like stories that just constantly push the plot
Oh yeah,
because you need breathing moments. You need to feel the world in order to really get appreciated,
yeah.
and that I definitely hope I hit the right balance, that's for sure.
So far, I've been, I haven't had any complaints. I'm not entirely. I need to figure out what chapter I'm on, so I actually know whether or not I'm saying that about everything you've written up to this point, or whether I'm saying that about, the first 6 chapters, and then suddenly the whole thing just hits the brakes. But from what I've read so far, you've got a pretty good balance going, which is good because that is something in both good and bad stories I've read. I have seen that, you know, end up as a problem a lot. There's a real problem that a lot of people, especially people who have not had a lot of experience writing, especially long form adventure stories, have, which is getting the balance down, getting the balance between not making it just exhausting with how constant everything is, but while also not making it so that the whole thing just feels like it's being dragged out, or that the breaks in the action are just like too frequent or too abrupt so that it feels more like you're starting and stopping violently rather than going up, going down, rising action break, action break.
Yeah, I think that's where my influence are very important because I follow in my mind at least the same pattern of action and pauses that I would see in my favorite authors like I aforementioned David Eddings, who wrote the Bulgariad series, which was it's sort of a it was in a way kind of like the same thing I did actually. That was back in the late 70s, early 80s when fantasy fiction was just all over the place and was cliched as hell. And he basically just wrote a thing where I'm going to write this in the style of these stories, but I'm going to write it my own way and have like all these like realistic characters and just like poke fun at these all these conventions, and it's going to be interesting and it's going to be funny and it's going to be compelling at the same time. And that's really the sort of thing I aspire to be. That's for sure.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
That's definitely something to go for. And this is another thing actually I like to I want to just say put on record here. If you are a relatively inexperienced writer, there are actually worse things you can do than find an author whose style really speaks to you and try and get that feel going. Obviously, you don't want to just rip off other people, but if you are really having trouble and like you're really just kind of starting out and really just like, okay, how do I find my voice? How do I make my characters seem realistic?
Mm.
How do I make the story flow right? Look at the authors who have really touched you or really inspired you and try and get a feel for their style. Like if you really find Douglas Adams funny, find out why his jokes land so well. If you really find Stephen King's stories frightening, or even just find them really touching with the non-horror parts, find out why his characters feel so real to you. If you like, you know, God help you,
Twilight.
the dialogue of H.P. Lovecraft, then find help. But
H.P.
know,
Lovecraft did not know dialogue.
oh God, yeah, he's terrible. But still, if that really is speaking to you, figure out why his incredibly archaic Byzantine language touches you so deeply, and then figure out some way to make that work for you. And then ask yourself some serious questions about why you hate people of other ethnicities so much because you are a terrible racist.
Segregation, yeah. Hey, Out of the Mountains of Madness, which had no races because there were no races in it, was a very
Actually,
compelling story.
Actually, I read a really interesting thing recently, and I'm just gonna mention this real quick, since we brought up Lovecraft. I read a really really interesting article that basically just pointed to the fact that you can actually make a really strong case that apart from all the obvious blatant racism in a lot of his stories,
Mm-hmm.
the entire idea of Lovecraft's horror is essentially there are things there are other things that are not us from somewhere else that are coming here and they're going to ruin everything. That's
That
what
is
all
true.
of his stories are about.
Of course, he was also frightened of the ocean, so there's that.
Yeah,
Yeah, that doesn't.
he was terrified of the ocean. But there's like also like the fun fact is all the stories also have the element of
Yeah,
trying to understand the other will
yeah,
just lead to madness and corruption.
that's true. Yeah, and you can interpret that as a race, and I would find that a very valid interpretation to say that he did not understand other cultures or people very well.
Nope. But yeah, so that's an interesting thing. That's sort of a weird thing. So if you don't know anything about H.P. Lovecraft, he is a fantastic horror writer who kind of defined the genre and was also a tenured bigot.
Yep.
So
That was his
there
thing.
you
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
But anyway, that has nothing to do with Pyrene, them, your story group or writing
No.
in
My,
general.
yeah. My stir group is transformations. We didn't. Yeah.
We haven't got to that, and I don't think we actually talked about that in the last interview. So why don't we correct that here?
Oh, sure. Go ahead. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
you wanna explain what it is?
Well, man, this was how many weeks ago? Like had to be over a year ago now. And well, see, I've always been very curious about it's a particular subset of stories, and that has to do with, or fiction it has to do with characters physically transforming into other beings or characters or things like that. And I noticed there wasn't a group for this on FinFiction. I just started to see if there could be, throw some stories and then see what happened. And all of a sudden it exploded. And now it has 750 members and it's on the front page of the groups. And that is interesting.
Yeah, you have actually one of the larger groups out there, especially one for defined by a genre rather than by a subsection fandom like the Passins groups or the winning verse groups or whatever.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And that's actually kind of impressive. I wouldn't have thought before seeing the numbers that you managed to pull in, like how many people really are interested in that subgenre.
Mhm.
But there really is a lot of there's a lot of people who really get into that, and like you go through the lists of the stories and stuff, and even the subgenres within that subgenre have fans and like all these stories and stuff, and it's really interesting.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, yeah, I think it's really fascinating in that, there is a certain thing where you can get with transformation stories that is it's a change of perspective. And I think that's something you cannot get in a lot of other types of stories, which is difficult. Like you get Franz Kafka's Metamorphosis,
Hmm.
which is all about, a guy either metaphorically or literally turning into an insect and basically seeing his world in a completely different way in a sense. And I would actually point out um, one of my stories, which everyone wants me to continue, which is A Mile in Her Shoes, which is all about the main six accidentally switching their pony races, where Rainbow Dash becomes a unicorn, Twilight Sparkle becomes a Pegasus, and that's the two main focuses because those two, being a unicorn is of tantamount importance to Twilight Sparkle's entire life, and being a Pegasus is so important to Rainbow Dash's life. Then we take away that portion of their identity. What do you get? What is the person behind that? And that's what I find so interesting about it. And you see them as another fic like that, where a person is pushed into a role that didn't exist, basically, and they get to see how do they react and how do they respond, how do they cope.
The destruction of self, like and self-image. Like there are some really interesting, very deep, you know, things that kind of tie into this. And
Mm-hmm.
again, it's the type of thing that I wouldn't have actually really thought would have gotten so much of a following. But like you click on this thing, you look in the thing, and there are I actually just brought it up right now just to point out for example here's you have like these subfolders for all these stories about uh, characters changing ages, becoming animals, changing genders, turning to humans being involved, inanimate objects, monsters, other body swapping, like all this stuff.
Yeah.
It's nuts.
And when you think about it, it's not that surprising when you consider things like vampires, werewolves, or but even there was like this really terrible movie when I was younger. It was a guy turns into a dragon. He goes to a world full of wizards and dragons and does adventure. There's like a story there, and and you see a lot of these things, and it's something people don't really think about, but it's more common than you would think when you get right down to it. I mean, there is some negative associations with it. Transformation groups like on 4chan or other bits tend to have a slightly sexual thing, which I do not like. I don't judge, but I don't want to make that a humongous focus of my group, so I ban things like rape and other bits.
Hey, bang rape sounds good to me.
I was gonna say, after I read this one fan fiction, which I think will remain nameless in case anyone tries to go and look it up. Yeah, I think banning that is probably a good thing.
It is.
Oh, God.
It is.
How many Days of Blue Blood was that? I don't remember.
Oh, it was quite a few, but that wasn't the one that I was reading.
Oh God! There's worse.
Yeah.
I'm sure. Honestly, I've had the ban if you fix. It's weird. Yeah, but like one of the most popular fics on the site is anthropology, which is all about somewhat okay, I don't want to spoil it, but Lyra was a human. This is not a spoiler.
The whole premise of the story.
Yeah, everyone knows this part.
Yeah, it's a little bit like saying, okay, so don't want to, not gonna spoil anything, but Twin Peaks, Laura Palmer is dead.
Yeah.
Okay, so minor spoilers here. It's the whole premise of the entire show, but.
And Paul from Dune is crazy as shit.
Oh God.
Yeah.
Oh, that's an entertaining show, I'll say.
It's so much fun. Yeah.
It's weird at times, but it's still entertaining. Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. There's definitely some. I would definitely recommend people check it out. We just, in fact, finished a Halloween contest, which had some interesting entries. I'll be posting those up as soon as they get on FinFiction. But yeah. And yeah, I mean, you see all sorts of things. Like you see werewolves, vampires, but I mean, and you look at almost any mythology. Like Greek mythology had the prophet Tiresias. Right? Sorry, I'm butchering his name, but he was a very important seer who was in several important plays. And he had what is it? He was turned into a woman by Zeus over an argument with Hera. And then you have Inuit mythology, like there's these other spirits that would lure people away and turn them into creatures like themselves. And that's really creepy horror stuff. And you want to, and I like seeing that sort of thing because you get a lot of like deep horror, like Lovecraft, where people would turn into fish people.
Yeah,
the deep ones.
There's sort of like the two sides to this. It seems like looking through the list of the stories and stuff. Like there are kind of two main. Okay, ignoring the sexual things that were they banned. There are two other main things that people go to these seem to be going into these stories with the intention of doing with these things, which is the concept of horror through body changes, kind of the Cronenberg thing of body horror, and then the idea of sort of a true self kind of thing, like exploring other people or coming to terms with aspects of your own being through transformation, which is actually something that is linked with some real world issues, including transsexualism and a lot of old as you point out, a lot of old mythologies, a lot of spiritualist traditions involve myths and stories about taking on aspects of other things or learning lessons through experiencing things from another perspective, literally.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it's really interesting, and I'm glad there's a home for that on the site.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm glad I'm the one who did. I'm not sure what would happen. I mean, like
if it was someone else, you can almost certainly be guaranteed that all that 4chan porn would have ended up right there.
True.
I have to say, actually, one of my favourite genres of horror, particularly in this fan base, is Alicorn OCs. That's one of the things that really scares me.
They're pretty terrifying.
Yeah. I've actually written a horror story involving my Alicorn OC. He defeats Discord and Nightmare Moon and all the princesses and then marries everyone in Equestria.
That sounds like it should be featured immediately.
Yeah.
Well, hold on, throw Trixie in there, and you will get.
Yeah.
Featured front page every day.
Yeah, it's like pinned to the top. Everything else appears below it.
Now, I have to say, now, Human in Equestria, I think that the best Human in Equestria story I've ever read was XCOM Enemy Unknown, or Equestria Unknown.
Especially unknown, yes. Not exactly your traditional story in that vein, but you do get a. You have a lot more likable. Honestly, you have a lot more likable characters than half the characters in Human Equestria stories, and you get the added bonus that they all die.
Yay. Actually, one of my favorite stories was the Conversion Bureau and all the
Oh,
spin-offs that came off of that.
Yeah, we had to make a special category for that because there were so many of
There's
them.
so many
yeah.
spin-offs. People like
We have a we had at one point it wasn't on end to end, but me and Lightning Rabbit actually took a little time to look over some of the story descriptions and some of the discussions about some of the stuff. And we found quite a bit by Miss Chatterjans.
oh Chatter
Chatorians, yeah, I don't know how to pronounce her name exactly.
Chatter
Yeah,
yes, I think
she
it is.
very prolific author, very popular.
Oh my
Has a
god.
very
Don't even get me started because I
She's
will just go.
controversial, I'll say.
what was that Echoes?
Yeah, she's controversial, I'll say.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
she
it. That's the one.
yeah we were looking into some of her stuff, and she's got some opinions
Yeah.
that she
Opinions
is
that I will
not
rant on if given
Yeah,
the chance, so I'm not
shy
gonna
about talking about.
even
yeah, I try
begin.
not to antagonize too much, especially within the position of minor authority in that group.
No,
Yeah.
more than fair. But yeah, no. Point is, there are definitely there. It is a good example though of the type of thing where it is people, experimenting with real world issues in the in this fantasy space, but using it to to really deal with and explore. I'm repeating myself, but he's exploring real world issues in a
Wasn't
fantasy
it
in a safe fantasy space.
wasn't it
I'm trying to get at.
alleged? I couldn't find it myself, but wasn't it alleged that in one of her stories, one of the scenes had like a rape scene in it?
Yeah, that
I never
is,
found it because I wanted to make
and
sure that there was
yeah,
actually one
and
there before I started saying about it.
yeah, she didn't actually uh, credit the Ravens as the villains of the piece, and seems to
Wait,
be on
she
their side. Point is, sometimes people have opinions
sometimes
that
people
you
have to
don't
do things.
agree with, and you
Yeah.
just learn to
But when they've
love
got
it.
like 16 opinions you don't agree with, it becomes very difficult to
Yeah,
ignore.
so about um,
Including like the human race is a terrible thing or whatever it was.
Oh, when you get to it, like the Conversion Bureau is like a microcosm of
Yeah.
the pony fan fiction as a whole. I mean, it kind of started as this like okay, there are all these different like sub genres of Conversion Bureau, but you got these fics where humanity is where it's completely misanthropic, where
Mm.
humanity is this horrible race that needs to be crushed and turned
which
into
was
ponies.
the viewpoint of the original fic, I should point out.
Yeah.
Negative, I think.
Uh, me and Lightning actually went and did a reading of it. Yeah, the original fic, it wasn't as misanthropic as some of the other one, as some of the humans in some of the other stories tended
Mm.
to become, but the general viewpoint of it was essentially humanity equals bad.
I don't know. I kind of felt like it didn't make like because the story didn't make sense anyway. It was like I don't know if this was like the original one or a spin-off that we read. I
It,
can't
it was
remember.
the original one.
Yeah,
It
it
was
was
the one
like
that created all the spin-offs.
but it was like there was the island where all the ponies lived, and their magic was killing the humans. And obviously, the humans weren't happy about this. But then the ponies were like, okay, the best way for you to survive is to become like us. And of course, the humans weren't happy about that. So I don't see, like, surely they're perfectly, like, they've got perfect grounds to not be happy about that.
Oh, but you forgot that humans are all greedy and polluters, and
Oh
Oh,
boy.
what was that really funny one? It was like, it was in Chattiance's
oh no, it
fanfic, I
wasn't.
think, wasn't it?
No, hold on. I think you're
Where
thinking
like
about.
Pinky goes, oh no, no, it was like where
No,
the
that
cat.
was the original. That was in the original. That
That was the
wasn't
original. Oh
Shadowlands.
my god.
Yeah, it was the original where
Where
they're
he's like,
like
oh,
where
I'm
Pinky and
sorry,
Dash are like,
I
oh,
just lapsed back into being a greedy, horrible person for a second.
yeah, like
Sorry,
the
guys.
main character is like has been turned into a bunny, and is like they're like, oh yeah, humans are awful, but you think like a human, like what would you do? And he's like, well, as a human, as a former human, I'd say that humanity wants nothing from Western beyond except to turn into terrible the whole land, strip mine, and turn into shopping malls.
It just became downright
And
laughable.
like everyone in the room is like, "Oh God, you horrible person!" He's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. That was just my human side coming out."
Yeah, no, it's like, do you remember that one? There was this one line. It was just, um, look at this beautiful place with all of its like serene countryside and everything like that. Think of the rent prices, and it's like no one would ever think like that. You're thinking of businessmen, not like the
Yeah.
rest of the human
But
race.
corporations are all people, and
Yeah,
therefore representatives
it's
of
like
the human
it's
race.
like the guy wrote the fan fiction while he was like, when you look at something and it makes you really mad and you just like rant about it for ages. It's like he wrote that while he was annoyed about something the human race had done.
And then you get ones that are even worse about the anti-human stuff. And then you get ones that respond to those
Yeah,
Yeah,
actually,
and have them go the complete other way, where ponies are monsters. Then
yeah,
you get the
yeah.
ones that respond to those both, where they are, I don't even know
I,
anymore.
I
Where
think
the
I think
humans are even worse.
it was worth noting that like in one of the I actually found the big group for the conversion bureau had like four subsections, and the subsections pretty much came down to pro conversion bureau, anti conversion bureau,
Alt-
anti pro conversion bureau, and
Alternative,
anti conversion bureau.
yeah, it's true. It's
It
like
was like yeah, it was like the stories that were like that were on the side of the humans, the stories that were on the side of the ponies, the stories that were on the side of the humans, and
Dislike the
like
ponies.
dissecting and like analyzing and trying to disprove the points made by the pro
Yeah,
pony stories, and then the reverse for the pony side. It's like it's really interesting, but it's also kind of
I think it doesn't really give a
terrifying.
good like. It doesn't really do much for the human race. It makes us all seem like
Well, to
these
be fair,
horrible people.
both sides have people writing in them that I'm sure are really good, and both sides have some people that are truly terrifying.
Yeah,
Like I read one story that was pro humanity. Well, actually, no. There was a Chedian story that was anti-humanity. That was like, yeah, the humans are complete monsters and they do all these awful things and they end up like killing all the ponies. And then someone wrote a response to that, which was essentially the humans do all the awful things, just like in the Chedian story. But the only difference is that the author is clearly on the side of humanity.
it's like
It's like
yeah,
you're both awful people.
they sh- they should have gone and killed those damn ponies.
yeah, yeah. Look what
Yeah,
they're doing, destroying us, right? Yeah.
yeah.
Oh,
It's like I just don't understand. Like, because it's a massive generalization to say, oh, the whole human race is inherently evil. Just like it would
mhm.
be the same if the pony race was like real and like appeared one day. You wouldn't
Oh,
say,
yeah.
oh, they're all inherently really good or really evil.
Yeah, and and the whole utopia thing is just completely ridiculous. I mean, even in the first season of the show, you saw that like definitely. I mean, they were racist towards zebras. They
Yep.
got
Mm.
monsters hanging around in the forest outside of town.
I was gonna
You
say,
know, it did. Yeah,
it,
and I mean, it's like, and this whole thing about like humans being this and that. Oh, humans are so terrifying, or humans are so good, or humans are going to kick the ass of every alien race. It's like, how many alien races have you had the opportunity to compare humans to?
it's like
Yeah.
Yeah.
if they come over here, they're probably able to kick our asses a lot better than we can kick theirs.
It
Yeah,
is true.
we can't
Yeah.
even get to where they are.
All,
So.
Yeah,
all things
Yeah.
considered,
like
Yeah.
I'd say that we're probably actually in a relatively decent position, morally speaking, considering the fact that we're not, well, an idealized village of humans generally isn't depicted as being racist and full of,
yeah,
scam artists who are willing to rip off, someone just because they seem desperate.
Yeah.
that's true. But
Don't
like,
forget, there was like a whole bit in the Fluttershy episode with Iron Will where,
yeah,
like, right at the beginning, there's a shopkeeper who's essentially just like, "Oh, you're desperate? More
Yeah.
money."
I'll charge you
yeah.
20 bits. Like, how is that not just like the humans who thought about rent
Yeah,
prices?
exactly. Like,
One of the main antagonist, like one of the main recurring characters, Diantiera's family, is canonically stated as having made their money by creating a chain restaurant, like a chain, clothing store.
Yeah,
yeah,
indeed.
it's
It's
like
not like this is, a
well, like
beautiful communist utopia.
added
Yeah.
to that, something that we don't necessarily have quite the same in the real world is every like beginning and end of series, some like massive like invading force always without a doubt will come in and like try
Mm.
and topple everything. Like,
Yeah. I mean, like you had one time, like a guy like turned the world into a living hell, and his
yeah,
name was John Delancey.
Exactly.
I think you will find that humanity will not have to deal with Discord until we manage to get into space and have a Frenchman who speaks like an Englishman
Yeah.
there to help lead us through it.
Like, it's just the kind of thing of, well, I think what the people in the show are trying to say there is that actually Equestria is, yes, it's a much nicer place in the respect that there's not a war going off every 5 seconds, but
Mhm.
the
That's
fact
right,
is
yeah.
that it's marginally better because what they're trying to say is, yes, it doesn't have so many wars, but it's
At least, yeah.
got dishonest people in it and people that want to overthrow the government,
It's
like
nice, but it
changelings.
isn't.
I mean,
Isn't
there is
paradise.
something to be said about the fact, the people, like ponies in general, do seem to have more openness in their society. They're more willing to, at least once you get past like the initial racism barrier,
Yeah,
they
they're
be
fairly
very.
welcoming and stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, sure, you can write a whole fix about that legitimately, and I would have no problem with that. It's just when you try to go the extra step and say that like it's a paradise and that Celestia is a living god
Yeah,
who can fix any problem. You're obviously
yeah,
just doing your own wish fulfillment.
yeah. She
Yeah.
doesn't fix
And
any problem,
the thing is,
actually.
even beyond that,
Just nothing.
She hasn't fixed a
oftentimes,
single.
in order to make their perfect utopias, they had to take liberties with the show, which ends up kind of running into the problem of paradise protests too much, where
Oh yeah.
one person like they'll try and create this idealized society and they'll like gloss over things in order to create that,
Mhm.
but that ends up just kind of creating your perfect society.
Yeah,
Oh yeah.
Like I see plenty of people who like write the things that's like, oh, and then like in this perfect world that we live in, there is no violence, or there is violence, but it is like
it's
very
good violence.
idealized, or we don't have racial bigotry, or we don't let in people who are like the evil races, but we're not being racist because they're obviously like diamond dots, they're pure evil
Yeah,
and
that's the
not an
point,
analogy
actually.
for anything.
There's actually quite a lot of violence in MLP when you think about it in terms of who it's designed for originally. Rarity kicks a Manticore in the face. Celestia gets her horn exploded by Chrysalis. There's actually quite a lot of various like little bits and pieces that aren't idealistic at all.
Oh yeah. And bringing this back even earlier in the conversation, this is the whole point of consistency with your source material and keeping the realism in your characters. And if people aren't willing to do that, people will notice. I mean, people get really bothered by inconsistencies. And
Yeah,
that's not like just people being pedantic or jerks. It's because we
that's
recognize when things are wrong.
yeah. We're very good at like just picking up on it, and it can. Like, I've had it before. Like you'll be reading a story perfectly fun, and then the character will do something really like no one in their right mind would ever do it, and you think, what? No, that's not right.
Yeah, yeah.
It sticks out to you because you're good at picking up on these sort of things. Humans are
It
just good
doesn't
at it. It doesn't
doesn't
fit in.
connect.
Yeah,
Currently not authors though.
yeah,
Oh, yeah, it's like Pinky is a prime example of this. Like, if you read just about any story that involves Pinkie Pie, there's a toss up as to whether or not, when you read it, you're going to get, Pinky as a character that is believable as the character from the show, or a hyperactive nutball who is, you know, basically like the shell
Mhm.
of the
of Pinkie
character.
Pie. Yeah,
And this isn't necessarily me just picking on Pinky. There are other examples of other things, but I think Pinky is one of the
The
best
main
examples
yeah.
because
It's probably one of the harder ones to pull off because
she's
yeah
easily flanderized. Yeah,
yeah,
her and Ruby both. Also,
uh,
in fact,
her
one of
and
the
who?
chapters of Pirene is where I play on that,
Hmm.
and then I make it so like I make these kids like completely out of character because
Hmm.
it's not actually them. And
Yeah,
that's the thing is like the reader knows this, but the perspective character who is a
well,
little girl from Earth who's never seen, there is no LMP show in Irene.
yeah.
So
So
she has no idea that everything's wrong, but the reader is like, no, no, this is terrible. Back it up, like you're being tricked. But of
yeah.
course the character doesn't know this. So
yeah,
that's the thing to play on sometimes.
yeah, definitely. Oh god. Okay, this is actually only this is just mostly as a tangent, but I just wanted to bring this up right here. I still haven't been able to find out where the heck I found this stupid story in the first place, and I kind of want to re-find it just because I want to pull it out in the street and throw mud in its face, but there was a story I read a while ago that involved each of the main six, having some sort of problem that somehow was connected back to their element actually corrupting them or something. So it was like, oh, this character's super depressed, and now this character's super depressed, and this character's super depressed. This is not, I should point out, the Pony Psychology series, which also had this as the main
Which also
plotline.
did that exact
It was
same thing.
another story that had the exact same thing going on with each of the main characters being depressed. But where the Pony Psychology series had an awful long story that followed it up, this one had a different awful long story that followed it up.
Great.
But yeah, the awful long story was essentially, I think I read it because there was a description. It was on EQD. It was around the time I first started really getting fan fiction, and I was going through the EQD stuff. I think I was looking down the list of dark stories, particularly dark adventure stories, and someone had written in the description of it, like in a comment, like, "Oh man, this is like congratulations on writing this. You actually managed to, make me really like hate Fluttershy while keeping her totally in character, like making bring her to a point where she's really unlikable while keeping her consistent in character." I was like, okay, that sounds interesting.
Yeah,
I want
to
to check
read
that
this
out.
now.
So I checked it out, and wow, the whole thing was awful. But like, the thing is, even the awful generic story about ancient evils and evil Alicorn Twilight. This was actually back in like season 1 or like late.
It was quite a while ago now.
But apart from all the generic awful ancient evil BS and the really dumb things, they had a lot of things with the characters where they just flanderized the hell out of them. And probably the most offensive one I found, like there was really bad stuff for basically any of the main six, and I could go on at length about any of them. But the thing that really offended me, and this is actually about the point I really started liking Rarity, was how it was pretty much just after I became incredibly offended at her portrayal in the story. And what this author did was taken Rarity and essentially gone, okay, Twilight turns evil, and everyone, all of her friends basically argue over how best to deal with her and end up kind of splitting up and each forming their own sort of resistance cell thing.
Right.
Rarity abandons her friends, all of her friends, and like her sister, and after like Rainbow gets murdered by Twilight, like
Right.
every reason in the world to get to want to get down on this. Yeah, the person the pony who kicks the Manicore in the face and stuff like that, and this is on all that. Yeah, Rarity ends up betraying everyone to the in the Resistance and basically just giving up on the cause and joining Twilight with the justification of, I don't want to get dirty by, fighting in a Resistance. Like, not even like I don't want to be in danger. I don't want to get dirty.
It's like, I don't want to fight in the Second World War. I might get dirty.
Get mud on me. It sounds uncomfortable. I'm not gonna do it.
It's not the worst thing that's gonna happen if you lose.
It's like the author tried to make her come up as like a tragic character or something because like she like becomes an alcoholic or something. How sad she is that she betrayed all of her friends, but it's just like
grasping at straws.
One, this character's awful, and two, this is so out of character. It's painful. You can tell a dark story where you try and have like the characters do awful things, but you have to be very careful to make sure the characters feel real when you're doing it, because you're already breaking the rules of the universe and the tone of the original story by doing what you are doing. And it becomes all the more vital that you make sure the characters at least feel consistent, and they don't. None of them do. They're all terrible. They're all terrible, awful people. It was also the point where I started hating Trixie, because the author basically made all the main six psychopaths, and Trixie is the hero who saves Twilight in the end.
Well, we know where his allegiance lies then. Yeah, he's clearly friends with Sothisto. That's a... Did his story get on
EQD? Yeah, it was featured on EQD.
Now that's interesting. I'm not much of a conspiracy theorist, but if a story that bad gets featured and Trixie is one of the good characters, I wonder what's been going on behind the scenes.
Well, if this was back in like season 1, or like that early, they were a lot less stringent about what got on
Yeah,
back then.
that's true.
A lot
I
of
think,
things got grandfathered in that shouldn't have.
yeah, I think it was like it was finished sometime after early season 2 because by around the end of the story, Discord suddenly just shows
Oh,
up
of course.
because it's like,
Yeah,
oh wait, suddenly we have this character.
Because why not?
yeah, back then they were a lot more open with what they took. It took me a lot of editing to get Pyrene in, and I think, and like not to be immodest, but I think Pyrene is a lot better than a lot of the early stuff they have on there. That's for sure.
Yeah, to be
I
fair,
don't read
you
most
know,
of the stuff on
the
EQD.
early stuff pretty much started with Sophisto just going like, okay, I'm
I
going.
like the
He
story.
had to, check everything that went through himself, and that was back when he actually had the 2-star rating.
Hmm.
Like now, you can't get that low. Like there are only like 2 or 3 stories that are actually that low on all of EQD, and that's just because they tightened up. They've tightened things up so much since then.
Oh yeah.
But yeah. So yeah, if you ever want to go loyal fans, if you ever want to go dumpster diving for some of the worst, direct you can find in fan fiction, check out EQD and then look at the like if they still have the star system because I think they removed it at one point and then they might have added it back in. But check out the stories by rating and then look all the way down at the bottom.
Well,
Yeah.
no, hold on a second though, because no, although it's got a 2-star rating on EQD, there's still several that are far worse that never made
Oh,
it on.
Oh no,
oh,
yeah,
yeah.
Oh
oh
yes.
certainly, but
I can't. I didn't even start with the worst series I've seen. Oh, I don't even want to think about
we,
it.
we a few times have actually gone on to FimFiction and looked for the worst by basically looking at the top rated and then typing in like jump to page number 250.
Yeah, if you go to the very last page, there's
Yeah, if
always
you go to the
one
very
that's
last page,
like,
you start getting into the creepy self-insert Sonic slash, MLP.
it's
I like Jesus Goes to Equestria.
Jesus Goes to Equestria is nothing compared with some of the direct we've found.
it's
Like
weird though.
Lyra and Hands.
Oh yeah, that's the thing. Like, it's weird. There's fanfics and like film fiction. I imagine it as like a barrel, and you've got all of the fan fictions at the top, and
Mhm.
all the way down to like the very bottom, which are varying degrees of good or bad. And then at the very bottom, you've got a layer of something that isn't like the rest of the fan fictions. It's not like water. It's heavier and it sinks right to the bottom. So you have to go quite a long way through all the pages to find it, and it's really terrible. It's like a thick kind of slime at the bottom of the barrel. Not to be horrible to
Like
anyone who writes
churning
about.
butter, and you forgot to churn it.
Yeah, exactly. It's like,
It's
oh, it's
not
not nice.
it's not even remotely spelled right. It's
While
like
you drink up the
Yeah.
top half of the
lang
barrel, you wouldn't drink whatever's in the bottom.
it's the sort
Yeah.
of thing where you don't suspect that you suspect that the person has English not only as not being their first language, but you imagine that they're pretty crap at their regular their original
Their
language
normal
too.
language. Okay.
And you
Well, they
got to
just
be careful with bad fan fiction because there's fan fiction that is written to be bad, like
yeah.
intentionally be
Craft
bad.
fiction,
Oh
yeah.
yeah,
And then
yeah.
there's and then there's fan fiction that the author thought that they were doing something good, but it was just not. It was just so bad.
And
Yeah.
then they've like had a change of heart and be like, yeah, it was supposed to be bad the whole time.
Yeah.
And then everyone likes it. But yeah, you have to be careful not to associate the genuinely bad ones with the ones that are just trying to be bad because it's funny.
Or the ones that are really disturbing.
Yeah, I
They
tend to.
are really well written, but
Yeah,
really kind of creepy.
yeah. The ones that I find most hilarious are the ones that are just really weirdly creepy, and the ones that are not deliberately bad, which is weird. You'd think that the ones that are designed to be bad because they're funny would be funny, but
No, it's the ones that are
it's the ones that
awful.
think they're doing well but aren't. That
Well,
in a
yeah,
kind of
well,
wicked way, I laugh at those more.
yeah. One site I actually recommend people who like really really terrible fan fictions is there's a there's a group called uh Miss it's a parody of Mystery Science Theater 3000, but it's like Mystery Pony Theater 3000. I'll link it on their episode, but actually no, I'll just look it up right now. Basically, it's a group that takes really bad, but legibly bad fan fictions by people who are both bad and really really aggressively
Hmm.
ponyverse. Playwrights is the name of the site. But they'll find stories not only by people who are really, really bad, but also people who are really aggressive in their badness, like who will like write a terrible story and then start flaming people, like flaming and comment banning people for saying the story isn't very good.
Yeah.
Because those people, they exist and they're unpleasant.
Yeah. It's weird actually how often you see that people who are bad and don't know they're bad and they get really aggressive about comments. I mean, I just think actually weird kind of tangent is people who promote pseudoscience actually tend to be a lot like that, and that's something I get into because I'm into skepticism and science. And so people who like crack theories about cancer, like, oh, all cancer is caused by fungus, which is caused by antibiotics, and they get pissed off at scientists who tell them how wrong they are. They're just elitists trying to control the conversation.
They're
That's all.
part of big vaccine.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, whatever you say. Yeah.
Oh man. Anyway, I think we're running out of time, and this has all gone spiraling into a beautiful, wonderful
Into
place that
controversy.
was not where we were meant to be. But who
Yes,
cares?
go read through the Well of Pirene. Shameless plug.
Yes, check out Well of Pirene, check out this transformation story group on FinPic. We will hopefully have a link for both of those in the description of this video. And until next time, thank you for tuning in, and we will see you guys next time. Thank you so much, Ether Echoes.
Bye.
Goodbye.
It's over. All right, hit the end.
I could have stopped recording earlier, but I didn't. Okay.